Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 26th, 2022. Time for another show. Hey, I don't know whether the sound quality is somehow different or I've got the headphones on different. I don't know. Sound like there was a little buzz to the... but there's a little buzz about the show today. We can spin it that way. Everybody's buzzing about the show. Everything's functioning. So that's the good news. Everything's going out. It is Tuesday. That's different from Monday. Though, not so much different, really. Okay, thumbs up. Audio's okay, says Justice, so good news for that. All right. I think it's audible. It just sort of sounds like there's something buzzing going on. But maybe that's me. Whee! Okay. Well, let's finish the tea. It's caffeinated. Maybe that's it. Well, at any rate, many things going on today, trying to grab other stories as things break, as they go by. Wow. Today I see in the headlines non-political, well, everything's political. At bottom, right? This is it's silly to even start out this way by saying that these probably climate-related catastrophes aren't political, right? St. Louis area apparently under a great deal of flooding today. So we start the day under the cloud of a flood of St. Louis. But that too is becoming fairly typical as well. But, and of course, there's never actually any lack of mass shootings. According to the technical definition of mass shootings, there are some every day. So we're never far from that either. At any rate, that's not what's capturing the most attention. In fact, what captured the most attention this morning in the few minutes just before the show was checking through emails and finding that, I guess, as is always the case, talking about raising money for the show and gathering donations for the show helps raise money and gather donations for the show. So, I ought to do that more often and probably live and update the messages, all of these things. But I got an interesting combination of contributions today. One, went out of their way and made an additional contribution plus one regular contribution that came in via subscription that just back to back in my email notices, kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I believe longtime supporter of the show who has sent a little extra along just the other day in response to my blathering about, it's good to raise money and it pays for things. And a little, slight pronunciation issue here, but this is what made it so interesting. So it's either, I don't know, sometimes you find this pronounced Stephen, sometimes pronounced Stefan, or something close to it, but Stephen, Stephen. But the problem is, it's I guess we'll say Stefan because it's spelled that way for one thing, and it's better than saying Stephen Miller, which I know must drive you crazy. If it is Stephen, or even anything close to Stephen, it must drive you crazy that there's this other terrible Stephen Miller out there. But luckily the last name is Miller, and most people will be like, yeah, well, okay. It's not that one. But so, you can get away with it a little bit. Of course, if it is Stephen Miller, I don't think he spells his name this way, so that's good news. And it's better than getting, sushi from him. You worry about things like that. But anyway, like I said, it was back to back with another longtime PayPal subscriber. Right since the beginning, since we put up the PayPal. So for many years now, I got a contribution every month from William Barr, which is spelled just like the former Attorney General. And to get the two of them together on the same day, I think is something special. So maybe those of you who have names that sound like prominent Democrats can start doing the same, and then we can announce your name on there, and then we can balance it off. As you know, you have to have it from both sides, and there you go. But thanks to everyone, of course, every day who makes this possible, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It's very nice to get any sort of steady contribution, and most people, it's I think on average still about $7 or so per month on average, which is terrific and not that much out of your pocket if things are going okay for you. And it's like I say, about the cost of, well, back in the old days, buying a soda from a vending machine, because now each day and listening to the show. But now, of course, most of the times I encounter a vending machine, they're selling the 16-ounce bottles and they're using credit cards, and they're in places where, I don't know, they're like $2.50 to buy so do that. You could send $2.50 every day. That would be fantastic. And everyone would love that, and good things would happen, and we could send it. It's like a chain email. We'll send you good luck, and if you don't do it, we'll strike you dead in the parking lot of a Walmart or something like that. We're very vindictive about our chain mails. All right, actual news that people want to talk about. I want to talk about people contributing to the show because it's very nice and it makes us feel good, and we're happy to have that. And it's just nice to know that there's people listening. And it's even nicer to find out that they are giving you money to listen. Okay, so anyway, the real point is that you should all do that, and then we should all talk about the news. So it is Tuesday, but it is a summer Tuesday, and Joan will be out today and I believe next week, and hopefully enjoying some fine summer weather with no upper, now Pacific West flooding. I don't think there's any flooding going on there. That's good news, unless it just rains forever. But that's usual. So I think they have pretty good storm drains there. But sometimes these summer Tuesdays, it's vacation time. People are out traveling around, taking their breaks. August, of course, Congress does that, even though we need them to be here. Digging into the insurrection, nominating judges and filling seats on the federal bench, passing legislation to codify things that the Supreme Court threatens to take away from us in overturning key cases. There's a lot to do. All right. Well, let's see. Plenty of things to catch up on, and Pocket's the place to do it from. In between sips of the tea here, we'll finish off this tea. I'm a sucker for packaging, as it turns out. And I went into this store nearby a great restaurant near us, which I love. And I guess we can advertise it, except that I can't remember the actual name of it. I know it. We know it in this house as the Venezuelan place. But they make this fantastic grilled steak, and of course all of these, all of their regional delicacies and favorite dishes, arepas, and all the good stuff that you would get down in Venezuela if you were just hanging out in Venezuela. If you're not, and you're hanging out in Loudoun County, I think it's called brasa, and they call it, like the little tagline is steaks, that is the meat, on steaks, that is the wooden what you would call it, skewer of sorts. But the steak doesn't come out on the skewer, so, anyway. But it's a terrific place in Sterling, in Loudoun County, and it's fantastic, and the food is amazing. And they're next door to a Persian market. This is great news, too, right? That I went into just to say, hey, what the hell is in here? And they have, of course, this Persian market has this gigantic tea section. And I bought purely based on the packaging. I couldn't even tell you what the brand is. It's all Persian, and I mean, it's written in Persian, I guess. I don't know what the written language is called. I don't read it, and it doesn't matter. I don't know. But I was really bought it because the packaging looked kind of cool, although probably everybody would think you were, I don't know, compromising national security as a white guy walking out with all this tea with all the Persian lettering all over it. But it looks really cool. It looks like I've been to some kind of foreign spice market. But I've only been next door to the Venezuelan place here in Virginia. So anyway, that's the tea of the day, and it's pretty good, and it kind of tastes essentially like Earl Grey, which is, that's a nice thing to have. They actually had one package that was labeled Earl Grey in English. This one tastes just like it, but didn't have that in English. And I used the Google Translator, where you can put the camera on things and get translations, and it it puts English words up there. It hasn't helped me figure out what the name of the tea is or what they call it, but it's kind of fun to do. And you should do it in between reading about things like, for instance, why 2 Democratic lawyers are concerned about the Electoral Count Reform Bill. Aha! How do you like that for a segue? I knew we had to get to the news at some point. I put this aside along with something else from the other day. You'll recall, I hope, that I read to you Greg Sargent's summaries and praise for the bill, and I still have some issues with the bill, but I was coming down on the side of, well, I guess it's still better than nothing. You should try it, and you're never going to design a bill that's going to be able to erase the fact that at the margins where you're fighting about issues of constitutional law, you can't really legislate this, and it could go in any direction. And a determined majority of the Supreme Court who determined to ruin things will ruin things despite whatever statutes you throw in their way. You should still try. And to the extent that you make a big deal out of having erected this barrier and having intended to erect this barrier as an act of Congress, when and if the Republican Supreme Court were to overrule it or bulldoze past it, you would at least be able to point and say, look, these guys are going to do what they want to do. There's clearly no stopping them, but we should be aware of that. Here's an illustration of that. Here's an illustration of the hollowness of their ideology. We have set out a very clear instruction from Congress right today, this Congress. We're still alive. You can come back and ask us what our intent was. And they still blew right past us. This nonsense about originalism was always nonsense. This nonsense about, well, we have to have clear instruction on major questions from the Congress. We've just given them clear instruction on a major question. They blew right past us. You can't fix that. But you might as well set up the hurdle. Like, if you don't set up the hurdle, then they just blow right past you, and you've got nothing to point to. So, I still am I'm still in favor of passing the thing, but there's still work to do, I think. All right, so where were we? I'll see if I can. We'll probably double back and read the second of the Greg Sargent articles, perhaps at some point, because there are some more pointed answers I have for that. There's a couple of places where he was very nice. We had a long conversation, and he was trying to incorporate what I was saying into this second piece, but I don't think I've been clear. Or maybe his interpretation of what I've been saying has helped me sharpen a little bit what I was thinking about, so I could maybe say it in a different way. But let me bring you this. I saw 2 things. One, the other day, as soon as they announced this thing, from the good folks at Blue Virginia, and they, I guess, were asking around about this new bill and got a mixed review, as one might expect. Thumbs up from Mark Warner, who actually has a vote to cast on one of these things, and a big thumbs down. Well, Mark Warner's thumb was big too. It's a big thumbs up from Mark Warner. Big thumbs down, though, from Mark Elias, who doesn't have a vote in this, but who you will recognize, of course, as a prominent elections law attorney. Very active and prominent these days. He says, no thanks. And in fact, in this other second article, he's also the source of the big thumbs down, but he's coming around to the point where he thinks it might be worse than doing nothing, and we'll see if we can't unravel why. So this is from a couple of days ago, end of last week, July 22nd, and a few minutes ago, it says here, Senator Mark Warner posted a Twitter thread on the Electoral Count Act reform bill he's involved in trying to get passed by the U.S. Senate. And according to Senator Warner, this is all a big quote, I think it's a positive step for American democracy. The bill would reform a 135-year-old law. And good article use there. So well done. And 135-year-old law that former President Trump exploited to try to have Congress overturn the 2020 election. There's bipartisan consensus that this act is way out of date. Even Senator McConnell has said he thinks it needs to be fixed. One of the most critical provisions of our Electoral Count Act reform bill requires one-fifth of senators and House members to challenge a state's electoral count. So just a few fringe representatives can no longer sow distrust in our democratic institutions. That is helpful, I think. It does sometimes worry me that it could come back and bite you, but there should be a barrier. And it's not an insurmountable barrier. If there are clear problems, you're going to be able to get that one-fifth. So, it will also prevent the alternate slate of electors strategy that Trump sought by making governors responsible for submitting their state's electors. And while Vice President Pence did the right thing by refusing to throw out the election results, we need to reform that system. Our bill would eliminate the influence of the VP. It doesn't have any, so it's not really being eliminated. It's just being clarified, but that's fine. Eliminate the influence of the VP so no one will think that they have that power moving forwards. We also have another bill, that will increase penalties for threatening election workers, help the U.S. Postal Service handle election mail, and more. That's good. I like the sound of that, too. I'd like to have gone farther, but this represents a good start towards preventing future events like January 6th and restoring trust in our elections. I don't know what kind of impact it's going to have on January or events like January 6th. I mean, crazy people will do crazy things, but you also can't really legislate that away. So you're excused from having to do any better on that front. Sounds great, right? Except that, according to Mark Elias, who knows more about this stuff than just about anyone, here a quote from him that says, Congress has the authority to make changes and enact a law that will improve the ECA, Electoral Count Act, to safeguard free and fair elections. Unfortunately, it looks like the quote got cut off somewhere. Unfortunately, the electoral count, and then it stops there. Unfortunately, the electoral counts, which is bad. But unfortunately, I guess he's trying to say the Electoral Count Reform Act doesn't do a great job at it. Why not? Elias explains his reasoning in this article. Where's it from? Democracy Docket, his own. Is it a Substack? No, but whatever. It's his own newsletter. And he writes in it, the proposed legislation aims to be more ambitious, and the result is a bill that in its current form is not ready for enactment. Lacking precision in critical areas, the bill feels less like the product of legislative compromise and more like something constructed in a law school faculty lounge. And it is impractical in ways that practicing lawyers would recognize, but Washington think tanks might ignore. And I think a lot of this is echoed in this other Washington Post piece that I have about this. And then commentary from Lowell, who's writing the piece up here. Oh no. Or uh-oh, now that does not sound good at all. But wait, it gets worse. Mark Elias continues, despite its preference for federal courts, the new bill fails to provide any legal standard for a court to use to overturn a governor's conclusive certification. Do you remember from the other day what the mechanism was? That the slate of electors certified by the governor in the certificate of ascertainment is the definitive one, and that you can't try to slip a second one by. And they're thinking here of trying to block the legislature from, a Republican-dominated legislature. This is what was tried in 2020 was they wanted to send it, quote-unquote, send it back to the states and have Republican-dominated state legislatures, essentially repudiate the electoral slates that had been certified and say that, yes, it appears that Biden won the state, but that's because the election was rigged, was slanted, or I guess they would say it was just invalid because it was conducted improperly. That is to say, the argument was it was conducted according to rules promulgated by by bodies other than the legislature, and that it is the legislature of the state that has the only word, final and only word, on how elections will be conducted in that state. And to the extent that boards of election or local judges make decisions like keep the polls open longer, or let's have drop boxes, or let's count all absentee ballots, so long as they're postmarked by this date and time. If authorities other than the legislature make those rules, in the new Republican interpretation of things, until it benefits them to do the opposite, they say those votes are invalid. But not only are those votes invalid, counting those votes, or I guess even contemplating counting those votes, renders the whole election invalid, and we will then revert to the power reserved to us in the Constitution to determine how electors from this state are appointed. And although we had originally decided that we would hold an election to do it, the election is all screwy, and they need our answer about who our electors are right away, so we're just going to appoint them ourselves. That's the theory. And that's what they wanted to try to engineer, right? The governors had signed the certificates of ascertainment for elector slates for Biden. They were hoping that the legislature would say that election doesn't count. It was invalid. It was poorly conducted. And the only other way to get you an answer on who our electors are is for us to appoint them. And that's our plan and our strategy. This bill says, no, you can't just send a new slate of electors. The governor is the one who determines which slate is correct. And for 2020, this was where they say, well, beware of fighting the last war. Where they say, okay, in the last war, the governors did the right thing, but allegedly there were people in the legislatures who wanted to do the wrong thing. They didn't do the wrong thing. They never went through with it. And although now there are still some that say, not only did we want to, we still can go through. Out in Wisconsin, they're actually still trying, as it turns out. But anyway, this bill only fixes things by leaving the final authority with the governor, so long as you don't have corrupt governors, which is true of pretty much any law. I mean, there's not too much you can do when you're just dealing with outright corruption. And people are going to say, I don't care what the law says. We're just going to do this anyway. But anyway, in addition to the fact that it doesn't have much to say about a corrupt governor, it does start to address the various problems that can arise. Like if there's any question about things, like you have a corrupt governor and he signs a certificate of ascertainment for the, what everybody agrees is the wrong slate of electors. What do you do? And the answer is, well, okay, you can go to court. There's an expedited process. You remember this part? They were going to assemble a 3-judge panel of 2 judges from the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, presumably with jurisdiction in the area, in the region that the state in question is a part of. And then 1 judge from the Federal District Court. And again, here, I don't remember whether they had specific language, but it probably does. And it's presumably the federal district that the state capital is in, where they cast the ballots for the Electoral College. And between this panel of 3 judges, they would determine if there was any question about which was the determinative slate of electors. They would determine it, and they would hand that to Congress. And then Congress, it says, must accept that slate and no other. Except, 1, we objected, we pointed out that there could be a big fight about, no, you can't tell Congress which slate of electors they have to take. That's a pretty serious problem and a separation of powers issue, and could very easily, I think, be litigated and come out the other way. But who are we talking about again? Mark Elias. Mark Elias is a separate thing. Before you even get to a verdict from the judges, there's something missing in here. And I think this is what he means in terms of being concocted in a law school faculty lounge. Although you would think that they would see this problem too, versus talking to practitioners about it. That there's no standards laid out in here. On what basis will these 3-judge panels be asked to make this determination? Well, we'll determine which the real one is. Well, on what basis? Well, on whatever basis they want. They'll do fact finding. They'll do, whatever. They'll read the briefs. And yeah, but I mean, shouldn't there be some standard there? So as he goes on, right, despite its preference for federal courts, the new bill fails to provide any legal standard for a court to use to overturn a governor's conclusive certification. One would hope that a federal court would overturn the results in a particular state if the big lie governor, for instance, certified the presidential candidate who received fewer lawful votes than the candidate who actually won. But nothing in this law assures that, or even expresses that preference over the conclusiveness of the governor's certification. A court will be left to wonder what standard, if any, is appropriate to overturn a determination by the governor that federal law says is conclusive. Without any articulated standards in the bill, a federal court could decide that it has no basis to overturn what is otherwise a conclusive determination of the governor for this reason or any other. Right, they again. I guess this is the oversight that that a practitioner might find that, well, legislators or law school faculty might not. Well, of course, we're writing this law with a particular disaster in mind, and if the governor just fakes it, well, then the courts would stop him. But the courts will sit there and say, the law currently says that the governor's signature is determinative. But it does give us the power to overrule this signature should we do it. And you could very easily see, with just 3 judges on the panel, how many does it take? Well, 2, I guess, is the answer. For them to say, I understand that we have the power to overrule the governor, but on what basis are we to do this? Does someone have to prove that he definitely lied? Does there have to be a demonstration of mens rea of any kind? You remember all of this. We have to find his state of mind. Does it matter if he thinks he's telling the truth? What is it?
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or 2 would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. It's a good question that Mark Elias asks. Where are the standards? And you would hope that that would be provided by way of providing guidance. All it takes is 2 judges on this panel to say either, well, I'm conservative, so what the hell, I'm just going to vote the way I want to and make the person president that I hope would have been president. There's always that, in which case the legal standard doesn't matter, whether you've stated it or not. But there's always the possibility of, it could be either a conservative or a liberal-leaning judge who just actually cares about what they're doing and says, all I have before me is the 2 competing claims about how the votes should have been counted, how ballots should have been counted in this state. And one person says that these ballots that are postmarked this way are invalid, and if you don't count them, we'll use the same old names here, Trump wins, and if you do count them, Biden wins. And there's all sorts of arguments being made one way or another about which one you should which ballots you should keep and which you should throw out. But what I have in front of me is a statute that says the governor's certification is determinative unless the court chooses to overrule it. but I don't just choose. I have to feel compelled to overrule it. And, if the election is extremely close, let's say, I mean, it might make a difference if the election just was not close at all and there's just really no way you could get to the governor's preferred result without just wholesale throwing out the results or eliminating millions of ballots or something like that, in which case they might feel more comfortable. But if it's close, I don't know how good they're going to feel about saying, yeah, well, the statute says the governor's signature is determinative. And I mean, unless somebody has some evidence to introduce, and it's a very short time frame for them to do this, right? If you can't produce for these judges evidence of, whatever it is, whether it's absolutely, evidence of like real wrongdoing, and there's memos back and forth in email from the governor's office saying, I don't care what the vote count is, I'm simply going to certify people for Trump no matter what happens. If you can find it, if you can get a hold of it and produce it in court, inside of, a pretty short time window, then fine. Of course, I mean, suppose you even know that there is such a communication. So now you're subpoenaing it, or you suspect that there's such a communication. Someone told you, you got a tip. So you've issued subpoenas for all of the emails from the governor's office. And is it going to take you longer than mid-December to get a hold of those things? Probably. And then what are you going to do as one of these three federal judges sitting there? On what standard? I really think he cheated? He said he cheated? Somebody else said he cheated? That's, that is a good question. So Lowell jumps back in here and says, okay, so after reading what Senator Warner had to say, I was strongly leaning towards supporting the legislation. And why not? But after reading Mark Elias's analysis, I'm now at best undecided. At worst, against this bill. One thing's for sure, it's not something we want to get wrong. What do you think? And then let's see, Mark Warner's tweets about it are embedded, so is Mark Elias's, but he's pointed to the highlights here about this. So, okay, there's more writing about it out there and available. Let's see, yesterday's piece that I led off this big transition with is from the Washington Post. Who's writing here? Analysis is from Theodoric Meyer and Leanne Caldwell, and they are happily crediting their researcher here, research by Toby Raji. So, why two Democratic lawyers? So we're going to go back, we're jumping out of the senator mode here with Mark Warner and back to the lawyers. Elias, I believe, is one of them. Why two Democratic lawyers are concerned about the Electoral Count bill. Again, this was yesterday, and they post early. So good morning, early birds, is the way they start. This is sort of a big roundup of all things political, so I'm going to have to skip down a little bit. But here's the first item on their big list here is why this article, why two Democratic lawyers are concerned about this bill. The Senate will hold hearings on August 3rd, which is next week. August 3rd on the bill that Senators Susan Collins and Joe Manchin unveiled last week to address the vulnerabilities in the law revealed by former President Donald Trump's failed attempts to remain in power after he lost the 2020 election. P.S. We think they're holding these hearings because Joe Manchin has COVID. So we'll see. It's a week away still. And I'm guessing that he's been vaxxed and boosted and stuff, so he might be fine to be at the hearing in a week, or he might appear remotely. I suppose that's a possibility at a hearing. But there you go. So what am I going to tell you? Joe Manchin has COVID. Anyway, it's never good news when people have COVID. The long-awaited legislation would update the Electoral Count Act, the ambiguous and confusing 1887 law that governs the process of certifying presidential elections. It's a compromise between 9 Republicans and 7 Democrats that its backers hope will win enough support to overcome a filibuster. Again, what are we talking about? Just one more time. There are 9 Republicans signed on to the bill. 7 Democrats signed on to the bill. Presumably more Democrats will eventually sign on, but are 10 Republicans who support the bill enough to guarantee that it gets past the filibuster? No, it's not. You need 10. Oh, well, anyway, that's a thing you might want to think about as well. They couldn't get that 10th. How odd. Maybe they will eventually. And it might mean that they get past the filibuster, because sometimes people say weird things like, well, I support the underlying legislation, but I just think that there's one amendment that I want to make to it, and unless I'm guaranteed that that amendment will be added, then I'm going to filibuster this bill. People do things like that all the time. Anyway, as they point out, not everyone is on board. 2 leading Democratic lawyers have raised concerns about the bill since its text was made public on Friday. Both of them, Mark Elias, a leading Democratic election lawyer, and Norm Eisen, a former White House ethics lawyer in the Obama administration, who advised House Democrats during Trump's first impeachment, said in interviews on Friday that they support efforts to reform the ECA, but Elias said the current bill is flawed enough that passing it as is might not be worth it. I'm sure it's better than nothing. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure it's better than nothing, Elias said. I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't come to that. Elias's concerns are rooted in the part of the bill that lays out how governors certify which candidate won the state. The bill states that the certificate of ascertainment naming the candidate's electors to the Electoral College shall be treated as conclusive. When something is conclusive, it means there is no room for contesting it, Elias said. The Supreme Court has said that in other contexts in the past. Consider Pennsylvania, where Doug Mastriano, the Republican nominee for governor, attended Trump's Stop the Steal rally and later hired one of the lawyers who tried to help Trump overturn the 2020 election to work on his campaign. And worse, has said, I'll cheat, right? If he wins, then he alone in 2024 will have the authority to issue a certificate of ascertainment as to which candidate's electors go to the Electoral College, Elias said. And that means that even if Joe Biden gets more votes than his opponent in 2024 in Pennsylvania, we'll add, Doug Mastriano could just certify the Republican candidate as the winner. I mean, he always could, not because of this law. It's just true. He always could sign a certificate of ascertainment for the wrong people. But now there's some extra power involved in that. Eisen, meanwhile, worries that the bill doesn't define the extraordinary and catastrophic events that would allow states to change voting hours or delay Election Day, among many other concerns. I'm not suggesting that the bill was not a thoughtful effort, Eisen said, but I think some of these changes are not quite correctly executed and actually could create more uncertainty in the counting process and the risk of manipulation. Remember that this bill allows for that to happen, that if necessary, if there's, I guess, to go a little further back on, it is currently the case that state legislatures, I guess, and state authorities can declare a failed election in their state if there is some natural disaster that makes it such that, only a small fraction of the voters who normally turn out are able to actually make it to the polls and cast their ballots. They could extend things. They could move the election day. They could extend voting hours, whatever it is that they need to do in order to give the state, in the eyes of those who framed the original Electoral Count Act, in order to give the state a fair shot at registering its preference. They allow for those things. But what, again, they don't do is define the standards by which you declare such an emergency. They just leave it up to the state legislatures. And, back in the 1800s, it was probably unthinkable that they would simply say, well, the emergency is we want to win the election and we want our guy to win, and so we're just going to say it's an emergency. When everybody can see that there's no flooding or fire or famine or war, invasion, epidemic for that matter, pandemic, then we would just never do that. But now, of course, you're dealing with legislatures that might the disaster is we're going to lose, or the disaster is, fake. It's a giant disaster of pedophiles kidnapping children and hiding them in the non-existent basements of pizza places. Make up your own disaster. Could they do it? Yes, they could. And Eisen is sort of pointing out that we don't define it, and these states could just go crazy and define it in any way they want. And that's true, too. Defining the standards is a problem in a couple of places here. So I feel like we didn't really get any further in explaining. There was some hints about further explanation of Elias's problem, which was, again, well, they don't really go as far as they did in the Blue Virginia, I guess, exposition of things, which was borrowing from Mark Elias's own writing, and maybe we should just read that. But let's see what the rest of this article has to say. What we gleaned from Blue Virginia's excerpt was that Mark Elias thought, okay, yes, it's true that a governor like Doug Mastriano could simply sign a certificate of ascertainment for the wrong people, but then the fix that the bill has isn't really much of a fix because it doesn't tell judges what to look for. What's an illegitimate exercise of the governor's power? It doesn't say anything about that, so they'll have nothing to go on. And some judges will take that as it's open question and up to us to determine whether there's been an abuse of power, which, is not an unfamiliar judicial role, but the time frame is still compressed here, right? This won't reach these judges before early December, and they'll have a matter of days to have, to depend on who exactly. I don't know who. I guess the aggrieved candidates team. That's right. We'll have a matter of days to compile an evidentiary, a body of evidence that proves to what standard we don't even know. That's not defined either. That these federal judges should step in and say, where this law says the governor's signature is determinative, we overrule because evidence. And the likelihood of compiling that evidence and being able to present it in a matter of days is probably not that good. And they're going to end up saying, I don't know, man, the law says determinative. I don't like this law, but remember, I'm not legislating from the bench. I'm a good judge. And I don't know what to do here. So I'm afraid I'll have to go with what the law says. The governor's signature is determinative. This law sucks. And I guess I'm not too worried about it because ultimately the question was in the hands of the Congress anyway. And it's not even clear to me that even if it was obvious to me what the standard should be, that I really could do anything about it. I could rule, even if I felt confident. Let's say I have a great set of standards here. The law tells me very clearly I can overrule the governor for these reasons. I also find these reasons to be existent, or extant, as they might say in their legalese. And so therefore I overrule this governor's. It's not really what you would be doing, overruling the governor's signature. They would come up with something else. But I guess ultimately it would be in the form of a court order being handed to Congress saying, despite the fact that Governor Mastriano has certified this, and despite the fact the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022 says the governor's signature is determinative in this case, we find ample evidence that he's lying and has cheated and has signed the wrong certificate, and we think you should instead accept the slate of electors not certified by the governor, but that the governor, an honest governor, should have certified. Here you go. Now, it depends greatly who's in control of this Congress that receives this order. Maybe it depends. Like, okay, if there's a Democratic majority, they may say, well, the Democratic candidate did win this state, and Governor Mastriano is lying, and we agree, and we're going to therefore accept the electors for the Democratic candidate instead. Of course, if a Republican majority is running things, they would decide the opposite if they were handed the same decision. Of course, if it's split as between the House and the Senate, it's not entirely clear what would happen there and which electors would be accepted. They'd have to fight about that for a while. But I will also add, what if you get Democrats who are in charge of things and who say, well, you know what, it doesn't matter, Democrats or Republicans. But I guess for the sake of illustrating the point, what if you had Democrats in charge of things who got the fake certificate from Mastriano, then got a court order saying Mastriano's certificate is fake, count the other slate. And they got that and they say, I am inclined to count that. You know what? I'll go through with this example, but we really should have reversed it to make it more likely and therefore perhaps more clear in how it works. But what if there are Democrats who get it and say, I really would dearly love to do what the popular vote count appears to have mandated, give Pennsylvania's electors to Joe Biden, let's say, everybody runs again. And the court says that we can, but one, the law says that the governor's signature is determinative. Yes, the law also says that the court can address that. But how can they address it? They can address it by handing us an order whereby Article 3 judges tell Article 1 legislators of a different and co-equal branch, you now must do this thing. I object to the separation of powers issue here, and despite the fact that it would give me great pleasure to certify Joe Biden as the winner, I must stand by the rule of law. The law says that the governor's signature is determinative, and the only way around that is for an unconstitutional breach of the separation of powers to allow Article 3 to dictate to Article 1 how it will proceed in counting electoral votes, and I refuse to allow that. What if I thought that the damage to the constitutional order was greater from that than the damage that would be done by certifying Donald Trump the next president, which is impossible to imagine. That's why it makes it very difficult and a bad example. What if, for instance, it was reversed and Donald Trump was declared the winner by a court in a totally different state where a Democratic governor had, for whatever reason, signed the wrong certificate of ascertainment, and the judges were acting in good faith and saying, no, you must certify Donald Trump the winner of this state. He actually did win more votes. There's a crazy Democratic governor, and he's exploiting this law to sign the wrong certificate in the hopes of installing Joe Biden in office again. And a Democratic majority Congress receives the order from these judges. How do they handle that? The judges say, I don't know what happened to the governor. He's crazy. But unfortunately, for you guys, Donald Trump won this state and by our count should therefore win the election. But our order to you is ignore this Democratic governor's signature on the certificate of ascertainment, count the Republican electoral votes from this state, and declare Donald Trump the winner. Do House and Senate Democrats say, well, the court says Trump won. The governor is totally wrong here. But does the court really have the authority to tell the United States Congress what vote they must cast and what their procedural rules for handling the electoral vote counts shall be? Because Article 1, Section 5 makes it pretty clear that each house shall determine its rules of the rules of its proceedings. And traditionally, courts have refused outright to even take up a case if they might have to decide in a way that forces Congress to accede to their will in procedural rules. It's very clear that the prerogative is with each house. It would be a terrible abrogation of the separation of powers to tell them otherwise. So what do? What if the judges are right, the governor is wrong, and if the judges are right and you accept their order, you do the right thing and make the right, quote unquote, right person president? I mean, with Donald Trump in the picture, it's hard to imagine. So I guess just there it would be better to just go with generic candidates. But if it was up to the Congress to accept the judge's decision, but accepting the judge's decision would mean abrogating separation of powers, I mean, there's a way around it. A compromise would be we're simply rejecting the court's order and then voting on who should be getting, which slate to accept from this state, and we vote to accept the real slate and would have agreed with the judges. It's just we're agreeing to accept that slate for separate reasons. We're definitely not voting for those guys because the court said so. We're doing so because our own fact-finding inquiry leads us to desire the outcome whereby we use our constitutional prerogative to vote in favor of this slate. And what ends up happening is the Electoral College Reform Act is essentially a nullity at the end. So, it could happen, and if you stand on principle and you really believe in the old rule of law, and if you're maybe an originalist when it comes to separation of powers, you might have to land on the conclusion that we're going to have to do the thing that will be worst for the country, certify Donald Trump as president. Would they do it in the face of all that? Considering how much more damage actually reinaugurating him would do to the Constitution, I don't know how that vote comes out. Nor do I know how the judge's decision comes out. But it's still a big problem and still looming out there. There's more in this Washington Post piece. Another section here that is headed legitimate worry or outlandish interpretation. Maybe mine isn't all that legitimate a worry. It is maybe more. It's an outlandish example, but more outlandish things have happened. There are plenty of election lawyers who don't share Elias and Eisen's concerns. Bob Bauer, a former White House counsel in the Obama administration, has praised the draft bill. 5 law professors who specialize in election law wrote that the bill, quote, would be a major improvement over the antiquated Electoral Count Act. And Benjamin Ginsburg, a longtime Republican election lawyer who served as counsel to George W. Bush's campaign during the Florida recount in 2000, if you want to trust a guy like that, gee whiz, said he has some minor issues with the bill, but that it's a consensus bill that moves the legislative process forward. Well, every bill does that. He urged Congress to pass it before another presidential election strains the system. Whenever the ECA comes to play again, it will be, by definition, a time of great national uncertainty, Ginsburg said. So, you need a coherent law to guide the process. The problem is that the other lawyers say this isn't a coherent law. Matthew Seligman, a Yale Law School fellow who's spent years studying the ECA, said he agreed with Elias that the bill doesn't allot enough time, only 6 days, to litigate challenges to a governor's determination of which candidate won his or her state. But, he said, some of Elias's and Eisen's concerns were overblown. Elias, for instance, argued that the federal courts might be reluctant to overturn governors' certifications because the bill describes them as conclusive. The statutory interpretation that Mark is worried about, he says, is so outlandish that it would lose unanimously, I think, in every federal court in the country, Seligman said. I don't know that I see that it's so outlandish. Conclusive means conclusive. But, of course, what would be the point of the same law? I mean, here Seligman could probably argue back. What would be the point of the same law that calls it conclusive, establishing a whole procedure for impaneling a 3-judge court, with all sorts of special seating and everything, to determine which should be, and that it says right in the law that its determination shall be determinative for the Congress. Now, all right, just taking that at face value, you could say, well, the fact that the same statute also provides for a way of getting around the governor's signature, should the need arise, pretty much argues against Elias's interpretation, or the one that he worries that judges will give to the word conclusive. I mean, there are certainly, I assume that he's telling the truth, cases where the legislation in question has said that something is conclusive, and judges have said conclusive means conclusive. Here, I think it would be very simple for the judges to say, well, conclusive still means what it means, but there's also something else that means something here, and that is that this same legislation, they must not have meant the conclusive in the same way, because otherwise, why establish this procedure for impaneling these courts? There would be no reason for it. If it's conclusive, then it doesn't matter. 100 judges, 1,000 judges, what's the point? This clearly means something other than conclusive. And I think they could get away with that argument. I think Seligman might be right there, although I'm not necessarily sure that they would lose unanimously in every federal court in the country. That might be overstating it. But, of course, that doesn't get past Elias's other objection that, okay, so they're going to leave it up to the courts. And the courts will say, no one has instructed us on what basis to overturn the governor's signature. So without basis, we're either not going to do it, or, I don't know, we will do it, but we're not sure why we're doing it. And that's not very strong in terms of an outcome. And then after that, you get to my objection, which is that now the court says, we don't really know why we overturned the governor's signature or whether we're allowed to, but we are doing it. And so I guess we're issuing a court order to Congress saying, forget the conclusive governor's signature. From now on, in this case anyway, this court order is the conclusive document, and you need to vote for these guys, to which Congress could say, we don't need to do anything. We're going to vote on this stuff the way we always do. And in fact, we're going to end up voting on it probably the way the old electoral count told us to do it, because the courts can't order us to do things like that, to take certain procedural votes in our chambers. That's just unconstitutional. So sorry, that's not going to work. None of those things have yet been addressed. So anyway, the next section as we approach our break is waiting for the House bill, because remember, this is a Senate bill and we have to see what the House has to do. And a lot of the people who are working on the January 6th committee are also hard at work on their own version of the bill. So maybe their version will address some of this, and they've really been perhaps more steeped in what the game was exactly that was afoot on January 6th, on and about January 6th, and maybe they'll come up with something different, because anyway, the real point is that the Senate bill won't be the last word on the matter. Let's hear what the House has to say. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. All right, are you ready for like a 2-hour show about the Electoral Count Act reform? I guess this is what it's coming to. Well, that's what we do on stupid shows like this. It's going to make it very difficult for poor Scott to do a summary, because we'll have like 3 links. But it's a show about the Electoral Count Act reform. Oh, and also the tea that I bought at the Persian store. That's in there too. Oh, plus getting contributions from what looks to, on first scan as Stephen Miller and William Barr. So, those are some frightening things as well. But, okay, so the House has its own version of the bill coming, and maybe they will address some of these problems, maybe not. I mean, remember that the Senate bill apparently is chiefly driven by Susan Collins and Joe Manchin, which, by the way, if you're on the fence about what to do, I don't know, this bill might be worse than doing nothing. I'm not really sure what to do. It doesn't address all these things. And you need a tie-breaking item, say, well, the bill was written by Joe Manchin and Susan Collins. So, no. I'm now a no on this thing. I think I'm coming down that side. Yeah, those aren't, the bright shining stars that I would necessarily look to solve this issue. Now, over in the House, another bipartisan effort, so that's good if you're into that sort of thing. And who are the bipartisans? Who are the 2 partisans from the 2 parties who have come together on this? Well, maybe you've heard of them. Liz Cheney, she's in the news a lot lately, and Zoe Lofgren, both of whom sit on the committee investigating the January 6th attack, have been working on their own bill to update the ECA, and the House Administration Committee, which oversees federal elections and which Lofgren chairs, has been looking at the ECA since Trump, tried to take advantage of the vagueness of the law in 2020 and take over the country and throw out the Constitution. After senators released their proposal last week, Cheney and Lofgren put out a statement suggesting that they'd put forward their own proposal rather than just accepting the Senate's. Okay. Next section here says, down to the wire in the Senate. In Congress this week, most of the action is in the Senate. Oh, okay. This is their way of transitioning to a totally different subject. I was wondering about that. Like, did they feel like there was some sort of deadline for passing the bill? I mean, there is, because the Congress is coming to an end. And August recess, they won't be doing anything, and that's like when they're going into an election year, traditionally sort of the end of legislating at that point. But no, this is their way of transitioning to other stupid stuff that we don't care about. Okay, we do care about it, but don't give it a lot of attention. What were they talking about? The agenda in the Senate, this is interesting, includes passing the chips manufacturing bill, like computer chips, a drug pricing proposal, that sounds more important, an updated treaty with NATO, I mean, I guess we need to have that, and federal protections for same-sex marriage, which is important but might not make it. Then a lot of other things too. So, okay, some of the stuff we do talk about after all. And it is important, and I'm glad they're bringing it up, but boy, do they have a packed agenda at this point. So, okay, now you got a better idea of what some of the other objections are. And I think taken together, that's a pretty formidable set of objections. We'll see whether Lofgren and Cheney do any better in dealing with them. Should we look at Elias's own writing about this thing? Let me see. We'll see whether his embedded tweet really leads to anything. No, I guess not. I'll have to look for this. He took screenshots, Lowell did, and putting this thing in here. Mark Elias, did I not put this aside? Is this not in pocket somewhere? I really feel like it would be hard for me to believe that I didn't put Mark Elias's piece in pocket here somewhere, and it's got a pretty distinctive looking illustration with it, but I just don't see it. So what if I opened up Twitter here and looked for this old tweet from Mark Elias that should have a link to his analysis, and that should solve our issue. Let's see. Elias, does he have a middle initial in that one? I have to look back at Mark E. Elias, if you're looking for his Twitter handle. And let's see, what some of the key words in this tweet that I need are ECA reform. Okay. I know, it's hard to do this on the air, but this is the way we fill 2 hours with this nonsense. Okay, my analysis of the Manchin-Collin ECA reform bill, and it's linked here. Let's look at his. I don't think we've already been through this because it was dated July 22nd. Reforms to the Electoral Count Act missed the mark is the title he used, again, from his place, democracydocket.com. And he starts out this way. Let's begin with the obvious, and why not? The Electoral Count Act of 1887 is outdated and needs reform. It's archaic. It sets the rules for how presidential electors are certified and counted by Congress. Of course, key parts of the law are vague, imprecise, and potentially unconstitutional. Armando says that all the time. Reforming this law has been on the agenda for pro-democracy advocates for more than 2 decades, since the close presidential election in 2000. For most of that time, Republicans showed little interest. That is, until now. 9 Republicans, led by Collins and Manchin, unveiled their plan, yada, 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 okay. 9 is coincidentally 1 fewer than the minimum number of Republican votes needed to overcome a filibuster under current conditions. The Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Act, as the new bill is called. It has extra in there. ECRPTA. That's not very helpful. Anyway, seeks to address many of the previously identified shortcomings of the ECA. The legislation makes clear that the vice president's role in counting electors is merely ceremonial. It bars state legislatures from changing the rules after Election Day when it comes to selecting electors, and raises the threshold for members of Congress to challenge the election results. The new bill also addresses some more modern concerns, such as what happens if there's a vacancy in the Electoral College, or if a natural disaster postpones Election Day. If this is all the new bill accomplished, it would be uncontroversial and one very much worth passing. However, The proposed legislation aims to be more ambitious, and the result is a bill that in its current form is not ready for enactment. This is the excerpt, I think, that we read earlier. Lacking precision in critical areas, the bill feels less like the product of legislative compromise and more like something constructed in a law school faculty lounge, and it is impractical in ways that practicing lawyers would recognize but Washington think tanks might ignore. As someone with extensive experience in voting rights and post-election litigation, I evaluate a new election law based on whether it will improve the prospects of free and fair elections or worsen the current state of democracy in real, if not so obvious, ways. After reading the text of this bill, I am not convinced the current draft passes this test. At the heart of my concern with this bill is the requirement that at least 6 days before the Electoral College meets, each governor must submit a certificate of ascertainment identifying their state's presidential electors. According to the new bill, that document is conclusive with respect to the determination of electors appointed by the state. Conclusive is a very strong word. Typically, in legal construction, a fact or piece of evidence is conclusive when it is settled and cannot be contradicted by other facts or evidence. For decades, the U.S. Supreme Court has reasoned that if something is conclusive, it is, quote, incapable of being overcome by proof of the most positive character. So I guess particularly in a situation where there are no instructions to the judges on these 3-judge panels as to what standards they must use if they want to overrule the, quote, conclusive signature of the governor, that's just going to make things harder. Conclusive is a very strong word. Can we decide that it must be a conclusive that's different from previous interpretation? If the interpretation is that it cannot be overcome, then there would be no point in impaneling these judges. And they might very well conclude, okay, well, it can't mean conclusive in the same sense that conclusive is usually taken, but it can mean that, okay, it's pretty strong evidence that this is the way we got to go, and to overrule it, we must need something really strong. It can't mean we can just do it for the hell of it, right? And it probably doesn't mean, well, if one guy says that my fortune cookie said we should overturn it, that we should overturn it, right? It has to be something stronger, but of what strength? And the problem is that there's nothing in this bill that says what kind of proof are we looking for, what standard of evidence, what standard of proof do we need to reach. You know, there's different standards of proof, right? In criminal cases, we say in this country that the jury has to believe in guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Or in civil suits, we might say the preponderance of, well, not that one, that's for something else, but the likelihood of liability is substantially more, whatever. I can't even remember. It's been a long time since I went to law school, but the different standards of proof, substantially more likely than, this outcome than the other, or, as we say, preponderance of the evidence when it comes to like issuing, warrants or subpoenas, right? Or so showing substantial likelihood of success if you're looking for a temporary restraining order. Different standards of proof, and there's no standard of proof given here. So, one judge could say, well, you're messing with a presidential election, and conclusive signatures from the governor, clearly the highest standard of proof, whatever that might be, given that this is not a criminal case yet. Our part of it here isn't criminal. What is that? What even is that standard? And some other judge might say, well, given that this is, in my view, likely unconstitutional to order the Congress to do something, it hardly matters what our standard of proof is because another determination is going to be made anyway. We're not even the highest court on this. We're not only not the highest court because they can appeal to the Supreme Court, but the Congress can ignore the order of the Supreme Court, presumably. So, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter so much what the standard is, but there's no standard at all. That's Elias's issue. Where do we leave off? Right. Okay. Talking about what conclusive means. Under such an interpretation, Elias's interpretation of conclusive, the declaration by a governor that a Republican candidate received more lawful votes than the Democratic presidential candidate could not be challenged, even if there was strong evidence to the contrary. Again, the judges would probably say, I don't even know what we're doing here if it can't be challenged. So they must have meant for it to be challengeable. So, if elected this November, a future Governor Kari Lake, let's say, of Arizona, or Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, could certify the big lie presidential candidate, whoever that may be, as the winner, even if the best evidence showed that he or she had lost the presidential election. And that, quote, conclusive determination would be the end of the analysis. Proponents of the bill will point to another part of the law to support the idea that the governor's conclusive determination is, well, not conclusive at all. Yet that provision is a bit of a muddle. It reads, any certificate of ascertainment of appointment of electors as required to be revised by any certificate of ascertainment of appointment of electors, yes, as required to be revised by any subsequent state or federal judicial relief granted prior to the date of the meeting of electors shall replace and supersede any other certificates submitted pursuant to this section. In other words, if the judges get a chance to sit and meet and determine that the other slate of electors should work, that would replace and supersede any other certificates, even signed by a governor, if it's received in the correct time window, of course. You are forgiven, he goes on to say, if you are confused by this language or feel less than reassured that the current Supreme Court will step in to protect elections from a big lie governor. It is unclear what as required to be revised by any subsequent state or federal judicial relief means. Required by whom? Subsequent to what? Revised how? I assume, but do not know, that this is intended to foreclose judicial challenges to any election results until after the governor signs his or her certification, 6 days before the Electoral College meets. So then during that 6-day span after certification by the governor, but before the electors meet, it appears the law contemplates that a court may order a new certificate. As an initial observation, a 6-day window would, as a practical matter, block most post-election litigation that requires a hearing to determine disputed facts. There simply would be no time. In some states, this short window could effectively limit even a well-founded recount. Assuming that there is still time for litigation, the bill imprudently favors federal court rather than state court relief. Okay. In fact, the only mention of state courts in the entire bill is the fleeting reference in the section quoted earlier regarding subsequent state or federal judicial relief. The remainder of the judicial review section focuses exclusively on the process and timing of federal court action, a framing that is at odds with how post-election litigation typically takes place. In 2020, 39 post-election cases were resolved in state court. The Bush v. Gore Supreme Court case in 2000 arose out of the Florida State Supreme Court, the state's highest court. Displacing much or all of this litigation into federal court will create uncertainty in an area of the law that already suffers from instability. It will also narrow opportunities for timely relief. It's an interesting perspective. I don't know whether I would agree or not. The bill further limits federal court relief by insisting all claims are heard by a 3-judge panel. Currently, post-election litigation in federal court starts before a single district court judge. Their decision is then reviewed by a court of appeals, the intermediate court in the federal level, and is subject to discretionary review by the U.S. Supreme Court, meaning the justices can decide whether or not to hear a case. The proposed bill, however, would require cases involving certification first to be heard by a 3-judge panel, consisting of 1 trial court judge and 2 appellate court judges. Given the way that Republicans have reshaped the federal judiciary, the result will likely be that any court reviewing a close presidential election in 2024 will have a majority of Republican-appointed judges. Maybe. Under the new bill, any appeal from this new 3-judge panel would automatically jump to the Supreme Court, which would then be required to review the merits of the decision. In the 2020 post-election litigation, Supreme Court review was discretionary. The Supreme Court wisely chose not to accept for review a single case brought by former President Donald Trump or his allies. The new bill would require the 6-3 conservative majority, to decide the merits of every future challenge that involves presidential certification, whether they want to or not. I don't know if that's my reading of it, but I didn't read the text. But okay, that could become a problem. And possibly a constitutionality issue again. Telling this, I mean, you can strip jurisdiction legislatively from the Supreme Court, but I don't know if you can demand jurisdiction by legislation. That's a tough one. Despite its preference, because separation of powers issues, once again, it's no more welcome that a congressional order or shows up at the door of the Supreme Court than a judicial order shows up at the doors of Congress. Despite its preference for federal courts, the new bill fails to provide any legal standard for a court to use to overturn a governor's conclusive certification. Let's see if there's more on this anywhere. One would hope that the federal court would overturn the results in a particular state if a big lie governor, for instance, certified the presidential candidate who received fewer lawful votes than the candidate who actually won. But nothing in the law assures that or even expresses that preference over the conclusiveness of the governor's certification. It's just sort of assumed, I guess. And that's a point. A court will be left to wonder what standard, if any, is appropriate to overturn a determination by the governor that federal law says is conclusive. Without any articulated standards in the bill, a federal court could decide that it has no basis to overturn the conclusive determination of the governor for this reason or any other. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 is undoubtedly outdated and needs reform. However, we must accept that some reforms will make elections fairer and safer, and others will create new opportunities for mischief and election stealing. Congress has the authority to make changes and enact a law that will improve the ECA to safeguard free and fair elections. Unfortunately, basically, this one ain't it. Okay, so, well, all right. We learned a little bit more. There was a little bit more detail here, and I think I have a better understanding of what his objections are. And well, golly, they're pretty good. So what else is out there that we might want to share with you? There are a couple other stories here. By the way, a couple of things came up while I was looking for things. During one of the breaks, I was just checking up on the Twitter feed. And I guess I better check back again. Nobody has sent any emergency messages. Okay, so that's good news. Well, oh, yes, right. That's a different area. And what about this one? Is this about two very interesting, different subjects? Shall we go with those? Or let me try this one here. There's a couple other articles that I put aside that are, I think, related to all of this. Well, this one has the most intriguing of the headlines. Shall we just detour over there for the heck of it, over to Bloomberg, where a prominent member of our Jonathan Corner has got a piece here. Oh, okay. Well, it's paywalled. Let's see if we can read it anyway over at, yeah, we can, I think. Oh, no, do they stop us after a couple of paragraphs? That's too bad. I think, yeah, maybe Bloomberg is one of those places that counts it every time you open even the same article. So there's your answer for that one. I was intrigued, Bloomberg, by the headline from Jonathan Bernstein. Trump is plotting to blow up the Constitution. We all kind of knew that. Contempt for the rule of law appears to be emerging as the main qualification for a job in a second Trump administration. This was about this whole Schedule F thing, which I think is pretty hilarious as a name for a schedule of government service employees. They do have those. But there's no Schedule F. But this is really more of a Schedule FU. The idea here being reflections on what Jonathan Swan at Axios reported the other day, and Greg read us about. The plan that they had in the closing days of the so-called Trump administration, when there was really very little time left to execute it, but I guess he was really aiming more for a second term. If he were to somehow be reelected in 2024, all indications are that they would go full steam ahead with this plan to basically, by executive order, I guess, and maybe with legislation if they were able to capture a majority in Congress, change the rules of the civil service. Right now, of course, it's very difficult for incoming, even from a new president, the president of the United States. This is one of those things that Donald Trump just assumed was within his power as president of the United States because he has a child's understanding of the presidency. Was the president could fire any federal employee at any time. He's the big boss, but that's not actually how it works. Because that's been a reform that we've adopted over the centuries, really, that we've been working on this stuff. That there used to be this, you might remember this from, oh, you probably don't. Unless you're one of those people like me who remembers, exact words that were used in like 8th grade U.S. history. The spoils system, whereby an elected president could do that. And he was the head of the federal government, and he, appointed everybody and could fire everybody. And guess what? It led to corruption. And so now we have a civil service system whereby you have career employees and you also have political appointees. The president does have the right to put his own people, and eventually her own people, into the top political offices, but they come and go. And the people who stay permanently are non-political and supposed to stay non-political, and it's supposed to prevent the ability of a president from just, grabbing too much power, essentially, and saying, not only am I appointing judges, not only do I have control of Congress, not only do I have political appointees at the top of every department, but if you don't follow my orders, even if they're illegal, you're fired and I'll replace you with somebody else. In other words, a Saturday Night Massacre for every position in government, top to bottom. Even if you are a clerk in the, in the regional office of some, I don't want to name any particular department. I don't want to make people feel bad. What if you're listening in from the Bureau of, I don't know what, corn syrup, and in the Department of Agriculture? I don't think there is such a bureau, but suppose there was. We would say this is terrible, wasteful, and annoying. But, if you did something that the president didn't like he didn't put triple dose of corn syrup in his ice cream every day because it's unhealthy. It'll make you very sick. Who cares? That's what I want, right? So you're fired if you don't approve the regulation saying it's okay to do that. Whatever it is. But the whole idea is here, Jonathan Bernstein was going to read something, and he said a must-read report from Jonathan Swan at Axios exploring the efforts of former President Donald Trump's supporters and other Trump-friendly Republicans to prepare to staff a potential Trump second term. During the presidential nomination competition of 2015 and 16, the Republican Party actors generally opposed Trump in part because they considered him risky in the general election, and in part because he was a big jerk or whatever. But he did promise that he was going to remake the federal government, and he found he couldn't do it. But this time he's going to force it in a second term. Well, Jonathan Bernstein probably has great things to say about that, but Bloomberg won't let him tell us. So that's interesting. Except I just wanted to bring up the fact that that is still hanging out there. Others are writing about it. I'm sure we can find more opinions about it. I want to keep it on your radar because there's an awful lot that could be done that could be terrible with this, and he's threatening outright once again to do just that. All right, let's see. Other things that we might actually be able to read. Something that Greg sent in his list of stories yesterday, but I don't think we took time to discuss, which is odd because he very frequently will go out of his way to discuss things that Jamel Bowie writes, as he has done here at the New York Times. There's a reason Trump could try to overturn the results of the 2020 election. I guess, why is he still trying? I think even in his mind, he knows that if he wants to be president again, it's going to have to happen in 2024, not 2020. But why is he still trying? Because we did learn that he's still calling legislators in Wisconsin, hoping to get Wisconsin to pass some sort of resolution out of its state legislature invalidating its electoral votes for Joe Biden. Not that even that would, undo his presidency, for even if it were accepted, which it wouldn't be. But let's see what Jamel has to say here. Sometimes it seems the Senate isn't entirely useless. Well, that's interesting, because also one of the other articles I have waiting here is David Dayen and the American Prospect doing what looks like maybe a whole series of articles on the very opposite. That is, the Senate is in fact useless and ought to be abolished. Why don't we spend the next segment on that. But going into our final break here and then into our final segment, Jamel writes, on Wednesday, a bipartisan group of 16 senators led by Collins and Manchin. This is more about the Electoral College Reform Act. Believe it or not, we're heading back to that. I forgot that this is where he starts on this, but I think he has more. Well, he released the text of the new bill. We know about it, a direct response to Trump's multi-pronged attempt to stay in power. The bill is meant to keep a future candidate for president, including a losing incumbent, from following the same playbook. At its heart, the bill is a major revision of the Electoral Count Act. We know about that. Specifically, Trump, of course, tried to pressure Republican state legislators in key swing states to throw out votes and send false slates of electors in place of the real ones. This bill would address part of that scheme. It would require states to choose electors according to laws that existed before Election Day. Isn't that a nice idea? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We believe it or not, our path really does pass once again through Electoral College Reform Act bill discussions. But I'm going to skip down to where Jamel transitions to something that can bring us to our other subject. As he describes the bill, he says he likes it in general, and then goes on to say, even with the provisions of this bill in place, the Electoral College provides any number of opportunities for mischief. The fact that an entire national election can turn on a few thousand votes in a handful of states is a powerful incentive to restrict the votes of your opponents and meddle with the process all the way down to the precinct level. The fact that the loser of the national popular vote can become the winner of a national election is additional incentive to subvert the voting process and impede access to the ballot box. And the fact that a legislature could, before an election itself, simply allocate electors to the candidate of its choice without any input from the public is an ongoing and ever-present threat to electoral democracy. It is a threat to electoral democracy, of course. It is also original to the Constitution, and, that's difficult to explain in a modern context. There's also the effect of the Electoral College on how Americans conceptualize democracy. This is an interesting point. I think it frames elections more as complex puzzles or logic games than as singularly important moments in self-governance. That's a great point and well put. From legal scholar Catherine Shaw, noting in an article for the Michigan Law Review. I mean, isn't that supposed to be, even George W. Bush, who was a total idiot, remember he framed presidential elections as accountability moments, right? I've been reelected. I've had my accountability moment, which was important for him because in his first accountability moment, he got fewer votes and lost the election. So, that's bad. But there you have it. But that's a good way of, I like that. It frames, the Electoral College frames elections more as, I would reverse it. Instead of making a presidential election and holding a presidential election out as a singularly important moment in self-governance, the people of the United States by majority vote, where every vote counts just as much as everyone else, select their own political leadership. Enormously important. But instead, as she puts it, I think quite rightly, it turns an election into a complex puzzle or logic game. Well, if we do this and this and this and this, you end up with the question of how can we win this election with the fewest number of votes? Like, where can we make that happen? And I guess if you actually put that, somebody could do that. I'm sure somebody has run the numbers somewhere. If you get, a majority of the vote plus one in every state, and thereby win, not in every state, but in just enough states to add up to 270 electoral votes, and then either lose every other vote, like unanimously in every other state, what would the outcome be? Like, if you really wanted to illustrate how extreme it could be, by how many votes could you lose the popular vote but still be elected president? I think that would illustrate something for you. Plus, of course, we have that problem of showing, oh yeah, you know what? In fact, Catherine Shaw gets to this in just a second. But again, I just want to emphasize how brilliant it is to put that out there, that everybody knows what an election is and what a presidential election is. And most adults know, all right, yeah, well, as you're explaining it to kids, you're like, well, it's not exactly like an election, like a vote, everybody, and whoever gets the most votes wins. It's not really like that. There's this electoral college thing, and everybody gets the sense that it's stupid and unfair. And everybody had the sense that it was kind of stupid and unfair before it started resulting in frequent election of minority presidents. But now everybody gets it, and everybody knows that it's a big pain in the ass. And it's weird that, what was it? Right after Trump's election in 2016, everybody was fond of pointing out, if 80,000 votes had gone the other way in certain states, in 3 states, it would be a totally different result. And Hillary Clinton would have been president. And I mean, that happens a lot in a lot of elections, and it may be fair or unfair or whatever, but it's just dumb that, remember now that our presidents, it wasn't always the case, but our presidents now are considered to be leaders of the free world. I mean, it wasn't the case from 2017 to 2021, but, even before that, before World War II, certainly, it wasn't the case. And, before World War I, nobody really cared who the American president was, abroad anyway. But okay, things have changed. Now, electing the leader of the free world in this day and age, it shouldn't be about, well, what if you push this stupid button? It should be about, who does the majority want at this point? So the Electoral College may have outlived its usefulness, is the upshot of this. As Catherine Shaw goes on to say in another very good point, in a similar manner, the ultimate winner-take-all nature of the system short-circuits any nuanced understanding of the political geography of the United States, which is an important thing, and has highfalutin words. But again, what she's saying there is, why do you design a system to make certain people irrelevant, or to make people feel like it? Why isn't it the local neighborhoods come out, you vote, whoever gets the most votes wins, and everybody's vote everywhere counts just as much? Instead, the Electoral College does dumb things like, for instance, well-meaning people who really want to see some sort of reform, either of government overall or the two-party system, right? You find them casting weird or protest votes in states like New York or California, where the outcome is generally considered a foregone conclusion. The Democrat will win. Maybe not always in every state, but certainly of late. In California, you say the Democrat is going to win California's electoral votes. So, but you tend to find people who would otherwise perhaps tend to vote for the Democrat, or at least the most liberal candidate, doing things like either sitting the election out because what the hell's the difference, and I don't like the candidates, or I want to vote for a third party candidate, or whatever it is, but it ends up rendering their vote more or less silent. It's ineffective. Nothing happens. Why would you want to do that to people? And then, of course, it leads to things like, that we used to think was an impossibility, gaming things at such a granular level as like Cambridge Analytica claims to be able to do, that I can bring out census tracts full of people who have never voted in their life, but who are at heart disenfranchised, disheartened, disconnected from everything, think politics isn't for them, and just want to strike a blow. They would rather blow up the system and vote for, well, you know, a serial rapist, for instance, let's say, just not to name any names, just to do harm to the people that they think have been screwing them for so long. And we can activate them. And if we can activate 80,000 of them in the right places, given the way the polling's going in every other state, we can change the outcome of the election. Everyone sort of suspected that Russia / Cambridge Analytica / Steve Bannon was doing this. I'm not certain that any of them are smart enough to actually pull that off, but they were smart enough, if they actually did this, somebody's been smart enough to recognize, yeah, you can F up a whole election just by doing that in 3 places. Well, you know, if you're going to get down to the granular level, shouldn't it be, hey, everybody come out and express your preferences and see them reflected in the results, rather than, and then you put it in the crazy black box computer and you see what happens. I mean, you can end up manipulating results or doing dumb things like saying the vice president is allowed to change the outcome, or we can send it back to the states. All of this stuff is enabled by the fact that it isn't just put your votes in this box and you guys put your votes in that box and whoever has the most votes wins. It's a lot harder to, you know, to manipulate that. I guess you say, well, you can stuff the ballot boxes, you can fake the votes, you can bring in bamboo, shoot full, you know, bamboo infused ballots from China and count them and put them in. There's always going to be accusations, but it's a lot harder for people to accept if it isn't like, you know what, this whole thing was a stupid logic puzzle to begin with. I never understood it. And the fact that you say somebody else won, I don't know. I don't understand any of it. But if it's just how many votes for this one, how many votes for that one, at least the fight seems straight up. So anyway, Shaw says, right, as he said, she says the winner take all nature of the system short circuits any nuanced understanding of the political geography of the United States. We color code the country in red and blue. And how annoying is it every time they circulate on Twitter one of those red-blue maps and say, just remember, you Democrats are totally outnumbered. I can't believe this country is, the elections are so rigged. Look how red the map is. There's hardly a blue dot anywhere. On the coasts, these 2 blue dots, and they always forget those blue dots have more people in them than they do in the vast swaths of red. The land doesn't vote. I know. It doesn't work like that. It's like coming out and saying, well, do you want this $100 bill or do you want this penny? Well, the penny weighs more. I'll take the penny. I mean, you're dumb, but that's not the way things work. The other one's worth more. It's lighter. Of course, you could say it's bigger. It covers more area on a map. Maybe that's the way you'll think. But we color code the country in red and blue, eliding the fact that Americans of, this is her point, which is not even mine. Mine is a dumber point compared to this. It elides the fact that Americans of all political identities reside in every county and in every state, Shaw writes. This coding may well have primed a portion of the electorate to accept outlandish claims of election fraud when a state like Georgia, one that had for decades been reliably red, now shifts to the blue column. How could that be? Georgia's been red forever. We all know it's a conservative state and backward, redneck dominated. No, it's not. Now, for a long time, perhaps Democrats abandoned it as such because they had lost it for so many years. But how frustrating was that to the Democrats in Georgia who were working, you know, as hard as possible to prove, no, this state is very largely, if you think all black voters are more inclined to be Democratic voters, maybe they are, maybe they're not. Don't want to debate that here, you know, or in what terms you're going to put that. But the fact is, if they organize and they get their people out and they're not intimidated away from the polls, they're not turned away by stupid or unconstitutional voting restrictions or people with guns or people with hoods or what have you, sure, it could be a blue state. It just elected 2 Democratic senators and very nearly a Democratic governor. It can happen. But we say, nah, it's a red state, and we blow it off. Or even counties. I mean, there's how many of you listening to the show are, as Joan always was, a blue dot in a red field. Now, Boise itself was a blue dot in a red field. But so was Joan herself. And how many people keep saying, oh, all you people who, you coastal elites, for lack of a better term, let the South secede. No, don't let the South secede. There's millions of us Democrats here screaming to get out, and we're having our votes discounted, our ballots thrown out, our voters suppressed. If you really asked us all, if you could really get all of our votes, and it didn't matter winner take all or what. There was no electoral vote. It was simply, I voted for you in Texas and my vote goes in the pile, and my vote is as worthy to be counted and as valuable to the victory of a Democratic president as any vote in California ever was. Well, things would be different. And looking at a map full of red and blue, if you were able to put blue dots and red dots out there for every person, then the map would be a lot more purple, and you would look at it and say, I see why elections are coming out this way in terms of the popular vote. And what I don't see is why they would come out the opposite way, because the opposite way is extremely stupid. The land doesn't vote. There's no real reason why, for instance, proportionally speaking, Wyoming, which has 500 and something thousand residents, should have 3 electoral votes. It should have a quarter of an electoral vote if it's proportionally done, but constitutionally they got to have the 3. How many times have we mentioned? Not enough, I think, that if you moved 1 million people, 1 million solid Democratic voters out of California, California would still remain reliably blue by millions of votes. There would be no jeopardy whatsoever to the Democratic victory there. And if you move them to North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, split them up, 333,000 in each one, you would all of a sudden win 6 Senate seats and probably 3 governorships and 3 votes in the House. Not as consequential as 6, but think about that: 6 votes in the Senate all of a sudden, and 3 in the House, which tells you a little bit about the dumb, mix of proportionality we've put together here. But you know what? You could do it. You could move 2 million people out of California and still not jeopardize the vote totals there. And you could put them in Idaho and, what did I leave out? Montana, and add 4 more. You could get 10 votes in the Senate. Remember when we haven't been able to get 10 Republican votes in order to guarantee getting past the filibuster for the Electoral Count Reform Act. We noted at the outset of this whole long segment. You can't get there. Well, okay, suppose we provided the 10 ourselves. I mean, you would immediately outnumber everybody in those 4 states, or 5 states. That's how few voters there are out there. There are 10 senators for these 5 states that together have, let's see, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming and Idaho. But still, I mean, basically, I don't know for sure offhand whether or not this is the case, but I don't think if you put all those 5 states together, let's do the math just for a second here. Indulge me. This is going to waste more time. But and somebody has already done this math, and you probably know offhand. I might go to my coronavirus page there too, because they have all the populations of the states sort of easily accessible. So it's time to do the math. All right, we'll go to the U.S. section here. We'll sort by population from the low side here. Well, the lowest population states. Oops, did we do it right? Yeah. Lowest population states, Wyoming, of course. They list 578,000, well, round it up to 579,000 people. Don't want to waste too much time just reading digits out. Vermont is next, which is, reliably-ish lately blue in their statewide federal elections, but they do consistently kind of end up with Republican governors. They could use some shoring up there for sure. But Alaska, population 730. I've left them out of this. 730, we'll round up 2,000. North Dakota, 762,000. South Dakota, 885,000. Delaware, pretty reliable in the blue, but that's the last one under 1 million in population. Rhode Island, Montana, Maine, New Hampshire, Hawaii, Idaho. So Idaho was the biggest of the population of the states that I mentioned, the western states, the sparsely populated western states, versus relatively densely populated small eastern states. 1.8 million, we'll say. So California, by contrast, has 39.5 million, so nearly 40 million people. You can take 2 million out of there, and it's still by far the largest population state. Texas is next at 28.9, so not quite 30 million people. You got margin of about 10 million in California. But as far as Democratic voters go, you could probably get even more out of there. And if you took 2 million and you distributed them in the 5 western states that I was saying, but let me look at those western states. I was going to total up their population. 579,000, we'll say, for Wyoming, plus we were going to do, we could do Alaska, but I didn't mention them. But okay, we'll skip them for this purpose, just for fun. And 762,000 in North Dakota, 885,000 in South Dakota, and we also mentioned Montana at 1,069,000, we'll say, thousand. And what else did we mention? Idaho, 1,787,000, and that is 5,082,000 people all together. Democrats, Republicans, everybody, the whole population. And what I was going to make the claim was, I don't think if you added those 10 senators worth of people together, and let's throw in Alaska just for fun, we'll add the 732,000 people of Alaska, and I get to 5.8 million. There are 12 senators worth. That's not the population of New York City. That's not the population of Los Angeles, I don't think. So you get what I'm driving at here. Does California have its county numbers here? No. All right. Well, anyway, what's the population of New York City? The population of New York City, according to the blah, 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 that have come up for 8.38 million. There's 3 million more people in New York City alone than the 12 senators worth of population in the 6 states that we decided to throw in there. Well, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Alaska. How many senators does New York have? 2, right? You see what the problem is? That's what I'm getting at. So where did we leave with Jamel? We were talking about the brilliant Catherine Shaw observations, that it also primes us to understand the place as like the country as vastly red whenever they show those maps. And that's the sort of thing that enables cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs idiots to go out there and say, well, of course, if Joe Biden wins, it's rigged. Look how red this country is. How can Democrats possibly be winning this stuff? You can see, Jamel goes on to say, this psychological effect in the often heated reaction to the idea of a national popular vote for president. Many Americans hold the sincere belief, it might not even be sincere, but many of them hold the sincere belief, for instance, that every Californian is a San Francisco liberal and every Texan is a right-wing Dallas suburbanite. They fear the domination of large states, as if each were a single uniform block of political influence, or as if size and density determined the shape of state politics. But it doesn't. And for most voters, residence in one state or another has almost nothing to do with one's interests, views, and political preferences. I don't know about that, but okay, I get your point. The Electoral College makes it difficult to see that each state contains a multitude of political perspectives, and that our democracy might be a little healthier if the vote of a Seattle Republican mattered as much for the outcome of a presidential election as that of a Green Bay Democrat. Despite the good things about this bill, the single most important reform we could make for our presidential elections is an end to the Electoral College in its current form, whether that means a national popular vote or the proportional allocation of electors. which already exists, by the way, in both Maine and Nebraska, or some hybrid of the two. We can and should patch the holes in the system we have. We should also recognize that it would be better in the long run to scrap the rules that make subversion a tempting option to begin with. Even though I'm about to do the same thing, right? Oh, let's say if we're stuck with the rules, take 2 million Democrats out of California, take 2 more million out of New York, and distribute them in those 6 states, and you will overcome the entire population. Never mind the fact that a good percentage of the population, I mean, at minimum, still 25 to 30% of those who turn out to vote in those states will still cast their ballots for the Democrats. You don't need that many people. 12 Senate seats, 62, a filibuster-proof majority, by the way. Also, we should be getting rid of the filibuster, of course. You know all about that. But what if there were 62? What if you also won a couple of other seats just for the hell of it? Like, on the merits in other states. Imagine, what would a Congress with 65 Democratic senators be doing? Right? That would be a pretty interesting thing, don't you think? 62 would be plenty. And nothing changes. Just people whose votes are erased by the weird way we count votes by boundaries are suddenly making a difference again. And, I don't know, participating in democracy. What a terrible thing that would be. Anyway, as Jamel concludes here, with that said, the most important safeguard for our electoral system isn't a particular set of rules or arrangements, but political actors who accept defeat, honor the results of an election, and allow the winner to take and exercise the power to which they're entitled. I mean, all of it goes out the window if you win the popular vote. Even you win the popular vote for Senate in Montana because lots of people have moved there and decided to vote blue. You can't just say, no, that doesn't count because original Montanans didn't want that. Anyway, and it is a serious and possibly existential problem for American democracy that a large part of one of our 2 major parties just doesn't want to play ball in that. Good points, all well taken, Catherine Shaw's included. What does that leave us with time for? Practically nothing, but as I said to you, I'll tease it with you now. I saw David Dayen tweeting, as usual, something very interesting. Our Prospects 2032 series. Remember, is he the editor of the American Prospect now? I think that might actually be the case. Our Prospects 2032 series on the big ideas for the next 10 years continues with 2 on the structures of our democracy. First, he's pitching here, Harold Meyerson, calling, this is interesting, for the end of the vestigial organ of state senates. And I imagine probably also the federal Senate as well. Abolish state senates. That's the piece that's featured here. But by the way, the tweet thread continues. And maybe we have time for this, but not necessarily the article. Definitely not the article, unfortunately. Nearly all state senates have the same party in power as the state house. And nearly all the functions are the same. 98% of state senates, this is a very interesting angle on this thing, don't confirm judicial nominees. The U.S. Senate shouldn't exist either, but state senates really have no function, he's arguing here. This is David talking about Harold's article here. Moreover, state legislatures should be proportionally represented through mixed member or multi-member setups. It becomes clearer with each passing day that the fundamental flaw in American democracy is the absence of any guarantee of majority rule. That is a quote from Meyerson in his article. I'll share the article with you. I'll even read it right up to the outro here just for fun. Abolish state senate. Sounds interesting. What the country needs is 50 majority rule unicameral state legislatures. And it works. It happens in Nebraska. They have no complaints about that in Nebraska. They're not sorry that they don't have 2 houses. At first glance, let's read you just one paragraph or so. The California State Senator Richard Richards, at first glance you might think you read it wrong, might have seemed an exceptionally powerful lawmaker in 1960. We'll take your word for it. The just completed census revealed that Los Angeles County, home to just over 6 million people, still even then, more people than exist in those 6 states we named, 6 million people constituted a whopping 38.4% of the entire state's population. So Richards, as the county's sole senator, could speak for more than a third of the state's residents. At second glance, however, Richards was no more than a legislative pipsqueak. And, more distressingly, so was Los Angeles, California. Like virtually every other state, so was Los Angeles. California, like virtually every other state, had shaped its upper house in the image of the U.S. Senate, apportioning its seats not by population but by jurisdiction. Every county was entitled to no more than one senator. As California's Senate had just 40 seats, but the state itself had 58 counties, the smallest counties had to buddy up to get the total down to 40, but that still meant that a senator representing a district with roughly 6,000 residents could, on any given measure, cast the same number of votes, that is to say one, as Richards, who represented 6 million. Well, it's a familiar problem, but a great observation that this could and should be done on the state level. We don't have to deal with a constitutional amendment at the federal level to do it. And state constitutions, well, they get amended all the time, quite honestly, and sometimes they get done. Those amendments are done by referendum, by the popular vote in those states. So maybe this is a good target, and maybe perhaps more realistic, believe it or not, than just moving 2 million Democrats to the 6 states I listed before. Okay, time to wrap things up for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Greg Dworkin will be here to lend some semblance to the organization of the news. But if you can't wait, Justice Putnam will organize the news for you next on the West Coast
From
Cookbook and Speakeasy.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And we have reached the part of our program and the part of our day where Justice realizes, oh my gosh, I never sent the summary of today's show for announcement on the Kagro in the Morning show. But you know how that goes. We always compress it to 1 or 2 lines and then mangle the last one anyway. So let's see. Lots of news from Borneo next. Who knows?